We have an unidentified flying object.
Researcher on a mission with Dr. J. Andy Elias.
We have an unidentified flying object.
Welcome back to another episode of Dr. J Radio Live, DRJ Radio Live. That is, of course, I am your host, Dr. J. Co-hosting with me live in London is Johnny Webb. Usually I have a slew of UFO news for you, but today we're going in a different direction because normally this is a UFO-based show. And one of the, right here on the tweeters, should I say, or twitmen, a very, very dedicated listener, a cool person, Fyrick, goes by Fyrick, was asking about Watchers, why it was so exciting. Well, you're about to find out because the latest series, the last one, the producer's actually on. But before I do that, today from a mainstream person who just thinks everything we're listening to and watching is total crap, sends me a link to the Washington Post, and it basically has something to do with this. This is what it says. The strange star that has serious scientists talking about an alien megastructure. Now, I don't want to read the whole article, but it refers to a Yale University astronomer who was talking about, to the New Scientist, I'm assuming it's a magazine because it's a hot link, about KIC 8462852, a distant star with a very unusual flickering habit. Very interesting. Of course, if you remember, SETI is still using audio. They're looking for radio waves. Snowden mentioned that. Are we not sophisticated enough to catch their encryption or to decrypt them? But I think there was a better article written a few months back, which we reported right here, which said that the best way is to look at other planets or look at the new planets found by Kepler, and to see which ones have artificial light. I think that is a much better way to look rather than using the, of course, antiquated radio waves. I mean, look what we're doing now with technology. If that's what we were using, in the 30s, which we're still using now, of course, we've upgraded everything. And a lot of people have seen that very famous, it was a binary code, it was a crop circle, it was a rectangular thing, and it was sent. I don't know who sent it. I don't know if it was Carl Sagan or not. And from Arecibo in, I believe, 70s, in the 76. I could be wrong. Somebody could correct me there. And what happened is, I don't know, maybe about 10 years ago, we received a message back where it was the same message, which showed that we inhabit a planetary system that has, one star, and we're the third planet from the star. It showed that we are made of carbon, and it showed our humans, the size, and then it showed a radio antenna. Well, when we received it back, the DNA code, it seemed like to have an extra strand. Maybe, again, someone else can explain that to me. But more importantly, what struck out to me was that it showed the beings as giant-headed, short, and they used a weird antenna-like device, something definitely not a radio transmitter. And I thought that was really, really cool. So I'm wondering if this has anything to do. I mean, again, everything has got to be connected in some way. Everyone out there has got to keep an open mind. And remember, everyone has to do their own research. All we can do is, as journalists, present the information for you guys to watch and learn and listen. And you guys come up to your own conclusions and then share them. And that's what we're going to do today with, of course, Richard Shaw, who produced all 9 of the Watcher series. And this last one blew my mind because it deviated away from not just aliens, because of course it covered that, a very, very famous sighting where our beloved departed Dr. Roger Lear happened to be on board the ship, caught a UFO in Turkey. And when you zoomed up in it, you actually see some alien heads. And this documentary explains, a time dilation, which we'll get to that, and so many other things, including global warming, Planet X, prophecies. I mean, so we're going to go all over the place today. So I welcome everybody out there listening to come out of the woodworks and join in and ask whatever you want. This may be very controversial, but again, this is just showing you the facts. This is actual footage. A lot of it comes from other networks from other countries, mainly from other countries, and footage that Richard himself shot while touring these other countries. Some of it very disturbing, but something that is very censored from us here in the US. And the reason why I first started to bring this up is because just today, the local news here in Los Angeles is we were hit by flash floods. You couldn't watch TV without every 15 minutes the National Weather Service coming about with a flash flood. So you turn on the news and what do you see? Oh man, you see mudslides, golf ball size hailstorms. And there was this one image, and it was a video, and this poor woman was trying to cross the street with her car, and it was just totally flooded out with mud. And so her car stalls out, so she gets out and she's actually walking, through the mud, and then passes this other car. Clearly, as the newsman said on ABC, she's not a happy camper, but nobody tried to assist her. I thought that was pretty sad. But again, everything is happening just like they said. This is an El Nino winter. They made sure to make us aware of that. The meteorologist, I don't remember his name, the very famous one from ABC Channel 7 here in Los Angeles. Anyway, with that being said, watchers, FIREC, for you out there who is listening, it's very exciting because it covers everything, especially this last one. It covers mummies in Peru. I think that was watcher 6 or 7. A cool cannon. It looked like a cannon that landed from a farm in a farm, that was tested to have some extraterrestrial properties, alien abduction, as I mentioned, the turkey footage. And now we're going to go into some global things. And without further ado, I got to bring on Rick Shaw. Richard, welcome back.
Hey, Dr. J, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great, and Watchers 9 was truly something that blew my mind away. You really went around, I want to say full circle, because when I first started, I was like, this doesn't seem, like a normal Watchers movie. This actually, if I left the room and came back, I would have thought I would have turned on and watching National Geographic Explorer. I mean, it was that vividly done, that well done. And I also like the narration, the guy who's on there. If anyone watches Watchers 9, tell me if you think the same thing. He sounds identical to what National Geographic is using. But what made you deviate?
He's great. That's Steve Friedman. He's narrated our last three films.
Yeah.
7, 8, and 9.
7, 8, 9. And 7 has received a lot of acclaim because that's the one that had the cannon, right? The cannonball. Right, that landed in the farm?
That sphere that fell from space.
So let's start with, of course, because I was mentioning the news in Los Angeles, the flash floods, and one of the big things that you talk about and you start off with is I remember seeing pictures of Lake Mead 10 years apart, 130 feet down. I mean, you just see the picture before and after, and you're blown away at how much drought there has been, and there's no question about it. Here in California, our governor is mandating, I believe, is 25% reduction, and they're about to, increase that to a 33% reduction of water. And if we don't beat it or meet it, we're actually going to all face fines. And so this is a very, very real thing. This is not just something that they're trying to scare us this time. You've actually found footage that this is no joke. And of course, everybody on the East Coast and the Midwest who is, being pounded by hurricane after hurricane and tropical storm and then another hurricane and tornado will know exactly what we're talking about. Something is going on now. It didn't happen like this 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. But the last few years, it just seemed more activity on every level. So what made you start to go that route? I mean, did you recognize that we're going in this global warming problem or actually witnessing it?
Well, it's actually this is kind of a hard question to answer because LA and I talked about, okay, we've got topics for Watchers 9 and we had topics for Watchers 10, and we were simultaneously working on aspects of both films at the same time, but we couldn't figure out what we were going to do for Watchers 9. What we had planned to do, we shelved because we felt like we needed to put more research into a particular aspect that we didn't have yet. So I said, the whole world is like in chaos. And LA said, well, I'm writing a book right now. I'm working on it called Days of Chaos. And I said, well, great. Why don't we make the film that? Because we've got so much material about it. And everybody's asking all these questions. And I didn't know of a documentary that had really addressed all of those issues. And yet some of them verge into this, if you will, like we were talking about aliens and all that kind of thing. And yet we've got other events, things that where countries and nations all over the world are looking for their messiahs to return. I mean, this is like a global thing that's going on. I've never seen anything like it. And then we've got all of this uh, stuff happening here on the West Coast where we're literally running out of water. And then we have the bees dying. And then, I mean, it's just one thing after another. And people are getting stressed out over all this stuff, let alone what's happening politically.
Thank you for bringing up the bees. Let me read you a quote. This is from another tweet from Bobby Robinson. He said, Grandma said weather is cyclical. And that's what I believe. And you actually were able to uncover that a lot of these events occurred in the past and are recorded.
Sure.
Now, go into the bees for a minute, because that's a very big point. I remember when it first was talked about, Linda Moulton Howe brought it up, because if we lose our bees, if they die out, as your movie said, you spoke to a bee expert, we will have a very bland diet, because 70% of the world, of the food population, or the world's food population will just go away. Just there won't be anything to eat. Certain fruits and vegetables, or all fruits, anything sweet will just be gone, and it'll be mostly a barley-based diet, is what he said. But when Linda Moulton Howe brought up the bee problem, of course there was theories that it was Monsanto. Some people even mentioned that they thought it was the radio towers, the cell phone towers that were popping up.
Right. That was a few years ago. We heard about that, and people were thinking that cell phone tower frequencies were confusing the bees and killing them, or that kind of thing. And so we asked all of those questions. We also wanted to know what's really going on with the bees now. Are they still dying? Should it be something that we should be concerned about? And a few years ago, 5-6 years ago, I guess it's been, I lived in Sylmar, which is a few miles north of where we are living now. But I would go outside onto the patio, and there'd be a bee upside down, just kind of spinning around, totally disoriented. And I go, I've never seen bees just like laying on the ground, disoriented. In my entire life, I don't ever have seen anything like that. And so I experimented with them. I'd go out there with some sugar water, and I would feed them. They're just like ran out of fuel or energy or something. And sometimes they would drink that and they would fly away, and other times they would just crawl into the grass and die. And they didn't seem to know which direction to go in. And so, is this an electromagnetic thing? Is it goofing up their sense of direction, or what's happening? So L.A. Marzulli got a hold of a beekeeper, which we show in Watchers 9, and we went over there, and he actually led us into his area where the hives were, and put screens over our heads, and basically I was shooting bees with bees landing on my hands and everything else. I wasn't really used to that, but I wasn't really afraid of them either. They weren't there to cause any problem. They were quite gentle, actually. They never stung anybody. And then we went inside where he had this glass-cased bee honeycomb where you could watch them do their thing, and it was amazing. But I wasn't totally convinced that was why the bees were dying, because in some instances he would say, well, we'd asked him about the cell phone towers, if that was doing, he said, no, that's been disproven now. We know for sure that's not hurting the bees. We said, kind of breathed a sigh of relief. That's great. Then we said, what about GMO foods? And he says, we don't know yet. But then the other thing that happened, I just didn't feel totally convinced. And I happened to be talking with Marshall Masters. As you guys probably know, he's the big Planet X guru. He's been doing that for years. But he also has people on, he has a radio program of his own called Cut to the Chase, and he had this guy on there, Dane Wigington, who was really into geoengineering, and I was listening to that link, and the guy was talking about the bees, and the more he got into it, the more sense it made of what he was saying. So I started researching it myself, and sure enough, these aerosols that they're spraying in our sky
Chemtrails,
are
right?
full of specific chemicals, aluminum, barium, strontium, and they're finding hundreds of times more particulates in these bees' bodies, the dead bees, than what is permissible. I mean, it's instead of like 3 parts per billion, it's like 300 parts per billion. I mean, it's enough to cause, when you are somehow getting heavy metals into these small insects, it short circuits their brains, essentially, is what it's really doing. And it does that to us too, to some extent. But what it's doing to the bees, it's giving them all the symptoms of dementia and Alzheimer's.
When I was at Travis Walton's place last November for his event, it's in the middle of nowhere, really. As everyone who's ever seen the movie Fire in the Sky or knows the story, Snowflake is very remote in the forest. You're going, at least 2 hours up this single lane highway on each direction through the mountains, and it's just forest. And I remember there's one town, and then 6 miles for the next town, and then 29 miles for the next town. And where we were staying, we woke up and we came outside and looked up, and it's just a really empty place. And what do you see? A crisscross of all these planes, and there weren't contrails. Obviously, these were, leaving something. And my friend took pictures. If only I can get a hold of them and share them with everybody. It was just amazing. And we even commented to the maid. She's like, "Oh yeah, this happens all the time." And I was really blown away. Why would they pick an area that has nobody? I mean, is it to kill the forest? Before I go on with that thought, though, there's a question that goes back actually to the beginning. Someone who hasn't really heard of Watchers, and then another person who has watched it. So I think we should address this because you're the proper person to address it to. This comes again from Fyrek. It says, "How do I ask this politely? Watchers hold themselves to more rigorous standards than, say, ancient aliens then?"
Is that a question?
Yeah. It's got a question mark after it.
Well, I guess I don't want to compete with ancient aliens or anything like that. I don't agree with some of their theories. I think some of them are a bit ridiculous. Like a great example is they had an episode on about the Nazca lines, and one of the guests on the show said, "Well, there's these elements there at Nazca where you could make rocket fuel," and and I met with Brian shortly thereafter in Peru in Nazca, and I said, when they said that, as if aliens would come all this way in spaceships burning rocket fuel like we did back in the 60s, to me it was so absurdly ridiculous. I thought, it's really not forward thinking. I mean, when we're talking about technology that's far beyond what we can do now. So things like that, when they say that, I think that's a little crazy, but we're just trying to tell the truth as best we know what the truth is about any subject.
Well, this truth took you around the world, and I was really shocked at some of the footage you were able to pull from around the world. Again, like I said, everybody out there listening, a lot of this is very controversial. For
Sure.
instance, when Obama, and again, you can't dispute this. This is actual. I think this was CNN footage, and then you switch to you have to explain what the answer and what country came from. He said something to the effect that the biggest threat to national security right now that we're facing is global warming. And then there was a response there that I just could not get out of my mind. Why don't you go ahead and say that response, and where did it come from?
I put that in because it's part of the days of chaos. It's the perception of the United States as being completely detached from reality at times by these other nations. They are dealing with people lopping other people's heads off, of bombs exploding, of mortars being shot into their homes and all that. And then they listen to Obama, and he's talking about global warming. They have real, tangible, murderous things going on overseas there. And it just, it actually enraged a couple of them. One guy was from Egypt, and I don't know where the other gentleman was from because it's all in Arabic. But there was enough English there it was from MEMRI, which is MEMRI. It's an Arabian broadcast that's translated into English. But they were just like, they weren't saying very good things about Obama. And because later Dan Gordon, who's a good friend of mine, he's a writer, producer, screenplay writers, and a ton of movies and Broadway shows and everything else. But he's also he has dual citizenship, U.S. and Israeli citizenship. So he's tied into really what's going on over there because he's also a captain in the Israeli Defense Force. And he said all of these nations in the Middle East feels like Obama has basically thrown them under the bus. There is no protection. There's no understanding what they're really going through over there. And so what has happened, we see Russia coming in to fill the power vacuum. And now we see China kind of entering the fray, which is really disturbing. It's like, wow. I mean, China has like 100 million man army. So, I mean, those kind of things are like a preamble to possible World War III when you see stuff like that going on.
Well, why don't you mention what's actually happening in Syria? Because that's really, really bad. I mean, we're sitting there supporting the rebels to overthrow was it Assad regime?
Right.
And,
I mean,
so what does Russia bring in? They bring in, these anti-tank and anti-aircraft, rockets and defense mechanisms, whatever you want to call it, weapons that are not to kill people, that are to shoot planes from the sky. The only people that have the capability, that Russia would use that would be like an F-18 coming from the United States Air Force.
It's a very complex war. I'm certainly not going to say that I know understand everything that's going on over there, but I will say that we've been watching this for years unfold, and it was brutal and bloody, and men, women, and children were being murdered. But it's also an Islamic thing, and when that element starts out in a country, it basically creates total chaos. And so all of the countries where we've deposed their leaders, like Gaddafi in Libya and Saddam Hussein in Iraq, all these countries have fallen into complete disarray. And they had to have this kind of really hard-nosed leadership to be stable. And some countries just can't endure democracy. They just can't. They just not, I don't know why, but they haven't been trained like we have here. They don't know what freedom's all about. And we worry a lot of times that because of the porous nature of the borders that we have here in America, that it's diluting our culture so that people coming in don't have any prior knowledge of what our Constitution's founded on. And the more people that kind of leak through, basically no one knows what freedom is. They've never been taught those things.
For years we've been fighting Al-Qaeda, right? We obviously after 9/11,
Sure.
Al-Qaeda this, Al-Qaeda that. I mean, just all you heard was Al-Qaeda. Even after we had supposedly, exterminated Osama bin Laden with his wife, I think one of them, and children. I don't know how many people were killed in that compound, but you still have, this rise to leadership in Al-Qaeda. And then all of a sudden, no news network is talking about Al-Qaeda. It's all ISIS, ISIS this, ISIS that. You can't go 48 hours without ISIS or ISIL being mentioned, if not 24 hours on the world news. And it makes me wonder, what happened to Al-Qaeda? Did they just change their name? I mean, or is it man-made terrorism, like to put fear into us? Or is it really happening out there? Can you tell me what happened to Al-Qaeda?
I think they kind of merged into al-Nusra, but I don't think they totally went away. And I think ISIS is kind of a new terrorist organization that some reason to have started in the first place to destabilize countries. And then it went rogue. A lot of people think that's what ISIS is all about. More and more people believe that. I mean, I don't have any proof and can't say one way or the other, but that's kind of the general consensus. But then you've got
you said you don't
Hamas.
but you do have one piece of proof. In Watchers 9, you have very old footage. And again, this was mainstream. Correct me if I'm wrong, if it was CNN or not.
Yeah.
And it was talking to a CIA, a member of the CIA, early 90s, and he talked about ISIS. He said what the acronym stood for.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, there's two. I mean, ISIS is known by different names. It's ISIS, ISIS, and then ISIL, ISIL.
Yes.
One meaning the Islamic State, and the other one the Islamic State of the Levant. And the Levant meaning of Israel and everything else. And then there's some people call it Daesh. It's like DAASH. I mean, I'm not exactly sure what that means, but there's all these different names for it. But it's really the same organization. But it's highly terroristic, and it's multinational. You got people from the UK that are in it, and there's also images that are not on Watchers 9, but that others have told me about, where being Islamic, you're supposed to bow towards Mecca, and pray X number of times a day. And they showed some of the ISIS members bowing in the wrong direction.
And another thing that you mentioned in this, or you were starting to talk about Hamas, and there's
Right.
some really, really sad footage that I can never get out of my head, and I hope no one has to experience seeing this in person. And I feel the person who captured this cell phone footage and escaped with their life is very fortunate. But the wedding, talk about the wedding. That brought me. That was probably the saddest point of the film.
Yeah, it's really horrendous. I mean, no one really knows that much about Hamas. At least most people, if you happen to stop someone on Hollywood Boulevard and ask him what Hamas is, they really don't know. In fact, some people are gung ho for Hamas. Oh, it's great. Get rid of the crazy Jews that are invading their territory. Well, none of that's true. I mean, no one knows the history of this and who Hamas is and what the Palestinians are trying to do and all of those things. And Hamas basically came in later, established kind of more or less a religious reign over the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And when they did that, it started out okay. They seemed like, very sincere people. And then it got crazier and crazier. If you weren't doing what they said, they would basically kill you. They would put a bag over your head and push you off a 3-story building, or that's the kind of stuff they were doing to the Palestinians, the people that they were supposed to be taking care of. And I think one interesting thing was that there's a quote of one of the Hamas leaders that says, "We're not leading the Palestinians to destruction, we're leading them to death." And Dan made a great point. He said, if your regime is all about leading people to death, then you're not going to be worried so much about the normal things in life, like what do you do with the sewage and how do you provide water for people to drink. You're not going to be concerned about any of those things. And they haven't been. So now we've got like a humanitarian disaster in the Gaza Strip, which could have been like an incredible vacation resort area. It was just gorgeous before they ruined it. And they've totally turned it into a war zone. And they're not taking care of the Palestinian people. That I've had dinner with Palestinians. Some of them are just great people. They just want to raise their families and live in peace. And others want to come over the border and stab Jewish people. I mean, this is what's going on right now. It's really funny. I know, like in ancient scriptures, it talks about the wheat and the tares. And there are both in the Palestinian agenda.
What about the fact that you showed some footage of these mass graves and Christians being exterminated in various parts of that region? Which, again, I got a lot of cool comments here, and Fyrick says something really good, and I agree with this, and I think everybody out there listening does.
Mm-hmm.
Says, I do not want anyone to assimilate. We all live here. Borders should not even be a thing. And, of course, before that, Bobby Robinson says, Europe is about to blow up. Let Russia take care of ISIS, and they won't assimilate. It's the same thing. But point being is one of the videos that was in Watchers 9. Again, you guys, everybody out there, you have to see it and come to your own conclusion, but it covers everything. And that's why I thought it was important to bring Rick on, because we are experiencing global warming, or not. If you want to call it global warming, we're experiencing some sort of climate
We're
change.
experiencing something. We don't know if the cause is really what they're telling us it is.
Exactly.
I'm very skeptical about that.
And something someone said earlier that I earlier said, and I agree with, is that it's cyclical. And you were able to prove it towards the end of the film by looking at the Bible and other texts which talked about droughts and floods and things that were very similar to us. And then that even links up to a whole nother conspiracy that other people talk about, which is Nibiru, or Planet X.
Right. Yeah, and as crazy as that sounds, all of these things, UFOs, aliens, and so forth, Planet X, all of these things, we just need to look at them, sit down, calm down, relax, look at it all very scientifically. Well, what if this is true? What if there is a planet that we've never seen before, but that has done damage in the past, and here's evidence of it throughout history, and here's writings from different cultures, and here are the dates for it. What was that? And I think that's why Sard's involvement in this film was important, because he looked at Planet X differently than anyone I've ever talked to. And I've had long conversations with Marshall Masters. I've had long conversations with Bob Fletcher. They both have their own points of view. I respect them both. And then there's also Doug Elwell, who I have never had the privilege of talking with yet, but someday I'd like to, that believes that Planet X is the sign of the coming of the Son of Man that it talks about in Matthew 24. Now, because basically it's always been an enigma when I've read that passage, and everybody seems to know what Matthew 24 is, including the guy who's the author for the Extinction Protocol, knew right off the bat what that was. And we're it basically says that there'll be a sign and all of the earth will mourn. Now, some Christians believe that that sign is actually Jesus in the clouds, but that never made sense to me, because it's like, well, why would the whole earth be mourning over that? That doesn't make sense. But if you saw something where you felt you were about to be destroyed, then you would be mourning. Oh my goodness, you're basically that thing's going to whack us, or it's going to do some severe damage. And there's all of these things where Gil Broussard has paralleled strange occurrences in the earth through thousands of years, and every few hundred years, a similar, very strange event happens. And what I thought in his research, he found this article from 1054 that was basically stored in the Chinese archives and was mandated by the emperor to put it in their Hall of Records. That planetary body, and they mapped it meticulously, as the Chinese did in those days. Very astronomical, very erudite description of this planet and where it was in the sky and all of that. And so Gil took that, and you can get computer programs now where you can run star charts and see what happens if you put those coordinates in, and basically use that as a starting point, since we knew that was a fixed position where there was a large planet in the sky that was visible, and went backwards in time, and it lined up to many of these biblical events that we have no explanation for, like the parting of the Red Sea, or the Battle of Joshua, where there was like fire and brimstone raining down on the other army, and all of these things are very strange. The earth, where the sun stood still for a few hours, or during the crucifixion of Christ, it was dark for 3 hours. How does that happen? There has to be some kind of explanation for these events, because I don't believe that these prophets, who are still greatly respected after thousands of years, were just making this stuff up. I think they were looking at it and trying to describe it in an ancient language that is hard for us to understand today, but trying to explain things as best they knew how. And now we're looking at it and going, well, what does this really mean anyway? What is he talking about? So I think we just have to look at it as a huge clue.
Johnny's got a question. Go ahead, Johnny.
Yeah,
Hi, Richard. Yeah, I wanted to go back to you were talking a few things earlier.
sure.
Praying the wrong way around, these militant mercenaries, and that was interesting because I remember seeing a documentary a few years ago with Zini Zabrinsky, and he talked about a synthesis of East and West, and that's what he wanted, to merge the East and West together. And so what he said we needed is the radicals on both the East and the West to rise up, which is what's happening, and then we take them out. And then there's no more radicals and everyone can live together. Now, as for these people praying the wrong way round and not facing east to Mecca, are you suggesting that these are mercenaries of the West that aren't true Muslims? And
That's what some people believe. Some people believe. Well, we know like who's the guy? Help me out with his name here. The guy who was really super tall and he's from the UK and he's lopping people's heads off. And they called him like one of the
some
Beatles.
Big John, yeah.
Yeah, Big John or something. Yeah. Well, he's not. He isn't one of them. He basically just joined up. He just enlisted into ISIS from the UK,
Well,
and
when
we
you
know
say
there's
ISIS, do you mean the Israeli Secret Intelligence Service? Because that's what
That's what I was trying to
known.
get out of you.
No,
from
no.
The CIA agent that you had in Watchers 9 that was talked about that in the early 90s.
No, this is the Islamic State where they're trying to formulate basically a caliphate and control most of the Middle East and North Africa. That's what this is all about.
We have a caller here. James, welcome to the show. It's nice to hear from you again.
Hey, how's it going there, Dr. J?
Great.
I spent a quarter of my life in the Middle East. So it's kind of fascinating to hear this show on the way it's went. I've been a contractor and also a Marine over there. And I've lived with Muslims during that time. So it's not as I don't know what I'm talking about. First off, Al-Qaeda just folded into ISIS. ISIL was an advent of this administration. And I did go over there the last time with this administration in 13. So,
so that's actually true. I mean, that's what I've been hearing too. It's interesting that you would say that. I mean, ISIL with the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant.
Yeah.
I mean, that's.
Well, the Levant cuts out Israel, and it was a jab the administration did towards Netanyahu.
Yeah,
that is exactly why they did it. Al-Nusra, while it is connected with Al-Qaeda, it always has been.
Right.
I mean, we can go into the esoteric parts of this all day long, but the fact is, the true adherents to Islam, and that's why they're killing even what we would call or deem or term moderate Muslims, they're killing them just as much as they are the Shia or the Christians, okay, and the Yazidis, and the So Iraq was under control. I hate to say I helped destabilize it, and then I helped restabilize it, and then we cut bait and ran, which I'll never get over that one. That's twice I lost that war. First Gulf War, and then going over there again. And I left good people behind, Shia.
Have you been on? So you've been on several tours of duty then?
I've been 4 times to Iraq, 4 times to Afghanistan.
Wow.
One term over in Indonesia, for different various times, but a total of a quarter of my life. I'm 47. But anyways, that's just getting into me, and I'm not trying to do that. Sorry about that, Dr. J. What I'm saying is, the Shia are now, and we always said that if we left, and it's happening, you're going to have the north being taken over by Turkey, and it will be. You're going to have the Sunni area assimilated through Saudi Arabia. You're going to see a Shia-Sunni war. And I agree with the person, whoever you were talking about earlier, saying the Russians are going to have to handle it because Putin, everybody forgets he was former KGB.
Right.
I was over in I was over in when there was still a wall in Berlin, when I was in the Army before I went in the Marine Corps. And he was head of Berlin Station. okay, for the KGB. Not the GRU, the military wing,
Sure.
but the actual KGB. And he was a colonel at that time. He's not to be trifled with. And he's punking Obama all day long. And the problem is our press doesn't report the truth of the Middle East. You've seen it if you've been over there, sir.
Yeah,
The press will
absolutely.
not report the truth. They'll say they'll make everything out to an Obama win when on a global stage all Americans look like fools when we go over because we're so uninformed.
Exactly.
And anyways, I'm on a diatribe now, Dr. J. I apologize for that.
No, that's okay. Someone who's
No,
actually
I
been there.
think
It's
this
nice
is
to hear from
interesting.
you.
I
Yeah.
agree with you.
I mean, you could honestly, you could consider me nowadays. I'm just a mercenary, but I've contracted. I've went over there with several agencies, plus the Marine Corps, and like I say, it just boggles my mind that I've seen our geopolitics fall down for 7 years now, and it's like we're rudderless as a nation. I got to be honest with you.
Well, I had the privilege of interviewing Colonel Richard Kemp, who was the colonel over the forces in Afghanistan from the UK, who basically is saying the same thing. That, I mean, this was for the other film I did on the Torah codes when I was there in Israel in the fall of 2014, and he was trying to set the record straight and tell the truth about. And I said, that's all we're trying to do. I'm coming over here to have people tell me what they're actually experiencing from Hamas, that there's been, 11,000 rockets fired since 2005 into Israel. And yet all we hear about is the poor Palestinians. We're not getting a balanced picture of anything or of what the whole Middle East thinks about Obama, really.
Right.
It's really a very warped and contorted view, and it's the more and more people just believe it's because of the corporate owned media that we have to endure here in the States, but our media is getting embarrassing.
I know.
It's really
sick.
embarrassing now.
Yeah, it's sickening. I'll tell you one thing I know for a fact. Before the last Israeli invasion of the one area in Palestine, okay, when they went in and took it over, they dropped leaflets because they knew where the rockets were being fired from. And it was a apartment complex that nobody was living in. And because they dropped a leaflet saying, men, women, children, get out of here unless you're involved with this, for like a week, they dropped them. The beautiful Palestinians, with I can't remember the terrorist organization. It'll come to me here in a
It was
second.
Hamas.
Hamas, yeah. They loaded it full of women and children so that when the Israelis bombed on that day, they would kill a bunch of kids and women.
Well, I was in a briefing at the Tel Aviv Air Force Base on the Gaza Strip in Israel, and basically they had aerial photos that they showed me, and actually Mike Huckabee happened to be at the same meeting, that we were both at the same meeting.
Right.
And they showed us that what they don't tell, and our media never tells anybody, is that the IDF actually makes phone calls to these people, telling them their buildings because they're going to be bombed.
Yep.
I mean, who does that?
Israeli Defense Force. We did that during World War II, right? Didn't we drop leaflets over
Yeah, in fact,
Berlin?
my dad served in World War II, and he brought
Does
some
that
of those
make it
home
more,
with him.
more acceptable then to do that? Should we mentally think that that's a positive thing about killing people? Because I still find that quite sort of dark.
Johnny, if you think about it, my friend, if you're dropping and making calls telling people to, get out of the area, doesn't that make it? If I was living there, I would do it. So it's only threat of death from your own that you're having to be forced to stay there, right, Johnny?
Well, James, I live in England, and we grew up with the IRA bombings, and they were frequent. And what we were warned by was a 5-minute call to get everybody out because we're going to bomb the place. So get out. You've got 5 minutes. Right. And it was sort of quite fearful, and I understand that what we're saying is the IDF is humane, and they're giving people time to move out because we're demolishing the house because one of these people that lived in the house supposedly killed an Israeli, and so we're going to demolish the whole house and all of the family's belongings. I still find this quite mad how, for instance, Caterpillar are allowed to sell these big bulldozers to go and knock people's properties down, and I see it more as a land grab. You know, we've got sort of
Well, actually, that's really not the
here.
whole story, though. I have to
Yeah.
disagree a little bit, Johnny, because having been there and walked on the borders there and talked with the people living there, it's if only people knew what's really happening, you wouldn't feel like Israel has been heavy-handed at all. In fact, there's times where I feel they haven't been heavy-handed enough to control this, especially what's happening now in the old city where people are just getting knifed to death. And then Abbas, who's the Palestinian Authority, the head of that, which is a corrupt organization, blamed Israel for killing a 13-year-old boy because he was knifing people on the street, when actually he was in the hospital. He'd gotten injured because someone ran into him with their car to stop him from killing someone. The Jewish boy that he knifed ended up in critical condition, and this little Palestinian kid is in the hospital getting every need attended to, and was on television today. He's fine. And yet they said that he was killed by the Israelis, which is not even true. So there's all of this information going out, and the fact about knocking down someone's house, that's really not the whole story. What they're doing, they're actually putting rockets. Now, these are normally Qassam rockets that they build, that the Hamas builds like in basements, and they mix up the whole thing. And we show that happening in the film. They have like launchers that they bury underground in hospital buildings, abandoned hospital buildings, and in schools. And we have photos of all this. So I know this is really happening.
Even mosque.
Right. And places you wouldn't expect rockets to be fired from, because they're humanitarian areas, but Hamas has no compunction for anything humanitarian, because, as the guy says, we're leading people to death. That's what they're doing. So Israel wants to come in and bomb the hospital because they know there's like probably 50 to 100 missiles in that building. They don't care about blowing up the building. They just want to get rid of the ordnance that's in it. And the only way that they can do that is to send a cruise missile in there or something, or fire it from a F-15 and basically blow up the place. But then what does Hamas do? They immediately get Palestinian roof the building, and under penalty of death, if they don't do that, they will kill them to basically protect this building. That's really what's going on. It's not just revenge things. And the other thing was that there was an intifada in 2005 in order to try to keep the peace. And you can remember, guys, if you think back to those days, there were people coming across the border with explosive vests and all this kind of stuff, blowing themselves up in buses and tour buses in Jerusalem. All that kind of stuff was going on. I've been to those places.
Kidnapping Jews.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
And so Ariel Sharon was trying to keep the peace, so he kicked out all of the Israelis that lived on the Gaza Strip, and they left it. And they let the Palestinians take over the thing. Now, look, they've gotten $2 billion given to them. And what do they spend it on? Tunnels.
Weapons,
Where that whole Gaza Strip could have been like a vacationer's paradise. There you are on the Mediterranean. It's a beautiful area.
But they feel like they're under occupation. That's the difference. It's a defense. I'm not trying to justify or side, but what I see is poor people, mainly women and children. There's not that many men left in Palestine. It's mainly children and women. And what we see is the US Army supplying forces to Israel as defense, and it clearly states not to use on your own people. And I remember before September the 11th, just before recently, that they had on CNN the guy from the IDF, and they was explaining to him, you're not supposed to use these weapons on your own people. And the very next week, September the 11th happens, and we don't hear about it no more. The other thing we're not hearing about anymore, Richard, is Zionism. I haven't heard that word being brought up in this discussion. Can you explain to us what Zionism is?
Well, boy, that's
I could go into that. I mean, it matters not, because look, Zionism, I know where you're going with this, Johnny, and I know your perspective. I've heard it a lot from Europeans. Okay, this is nothing new. The thing is, the Europeans that I run with, the ones that are first time in the country talk a lot like you do until they actually have to deal with them. And your country itself is being overrun right now, all by military aged men. Same with all of Europe. You don't see many women and children unless they get drowned on a beach to play to our sympathies. Okay? That's a non sequitur. And if you want to know where those boys are along the border trying to get over into Israel, trying to do bad things. And like I said, the true adherents to Islam, if you really want to be technical and follow the Quran, I don't know if you've read it, the Surah, and also the Hadith. But until you've read it, then you'll understand the true adherents to Islamic belief are not the moderates. They are the Al Qaedas. They are the ISIS. That it says everything in the Quran, Muhammad's teachings say you spread it by the source, you also by force. If they won't willingly convert, also you have to invade a country, i.e., just like they're doing to Europe, with no weapons. It's old Sun Tzu. Take nothing to your enemy camp. Use only what you find there against them. I mean, it's basic Eastern philosophy. In the West, we haven't been spun up. Your nations have fought against this before in the Crusades, and now we're dealing with it in a whole wrong-headed way. The entire European continent, you're going to see a total sea change if you're not careful in about 15 to 20 years.
I tend to agree with that. I mean, it's because people are just they think modern civilization couldn't possibly be thinking this way, but that's actually what's going on, and we have to be aware of it. There's a film that the BBC put out in 2007 where they put undercover cameras on a woman, and she went into a mosque and heard the teaching there, and it said, someone that doesn't believe like you do, you're to kill them. Kill them. That's what they were teaching. So, I mean, it's like, and as far as the Palestinians are concerned, back in 2000, it's kind of been, I've been told that it was kind of considered the golden age. The Palestinians would live in Gaza somewhere, and they'd have jobs in Israel. They'd get paid well. They'd go home and hang out on the beach at night and come back the next day and do that. When Hamas came in, all that went away. Israel isn't going to start a war. I mean, they have no reason to want to do that. There's not a single Israeli I've ever met that wants to go out and kill people.
Have you ever heard of the USS Liberty?
The ship.
Yeah, that was back in the 60s. So the point?
It was just, I remember this ship attacked Americans and killed about 300 Americans.
Yeah, it was a listening ship. It was a spy ship, and it was right before Israel launched. It was right before Israel launched an attack, and Israel told the U.S., back your ship away, and we refused. Now, any nation has the right to self-defense. That's a red herring thrown out a lot because of the Zionist point of view. Zionism is Nazism is where you're going with this, right, Johnny? I'm telling you, my friend, the proper use of force, people forget, who did Adolf Hitler meet? He met the Grand Mufti. What was the most decorated SS units? They were the Islamic units. I'm telling you, my friend, we in the West have a short memory.
Benjamin Netanyahu was in London not 6 months ago with a lot of other Europeans and Americans, and they were all there talking about how we brought down the Berlin Wall. And right in the same speech, we're building this massive wall around Bethlehem. I mean, it's hypocrisy. What's going on, guys?
No, you have to. A nation that does not respect its border, Hitler said this even, will get no respect from any other nation. America's seeing this right now, and so is Europe, Johnny.
You know, obviously this couldn't go on for hours, weeks, days. Everyone's going to have a different.
I know there's a lot of
Watchers 9
really strong opinions here. I mean, I would just say watch Watchers 9. It's not preachy. It just basically shows what's going on.
You had an hour and 50 minutes in the film, and this was just a small tidbit of it. Of course, there's an alien portion of it. There's the Planet X portion of it. There's the Bible code / Torah code aspect of it. Like as you mentioned, the prophets. There's so much about it. Let me jump in and say this. When you talked about, east, praying to the east. Isn't east west and west east? I mean, really, when you look at it on a global scale, no matter what, you're always going to go around and meet the other side.
Well, they were the one that I was referred to was that everybody was facing a different direction. So they weren't used to doing this. And there are also times where, I looked at all that footage that I used very carefully. Some of it, I wonder if it's fake, because you don't shoot someone with
one of the actual Twitterers, I guess that would be the tweet mans, should I say. Yeah, should say that one of the executions or the beheadings was a fake video. I wouldn't be surprised, because there's a lot of propaganda that is used for us to start things. And again, take it one step further into the alien realm. Of course, that's what's been used to suppress things, like, for instance, the weather balloon explanation back in '47 for Roswell.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that was pathetic, a pathetic answer for really a factual thing that actually happened. I mean, we look at it now and we all laugh. So it's like, well, what else have they tried to, pull the wool over our eyes about? And I think it's just the modern news media's ridicule of anyone that sees anything. But now I think they're starting to look ridiculous by doing that.
Now, let's mention the Torah codes for a bit, because that is in there. Torah, Bible, the Old Testament of the Bible. You had some things in there that were written, and you did an entire film on that called the Torah codes, and you used bits of it in Watchers 9, and there were some events that occurred prior to Watchers 9 that you documented in the Torah codes that sure enough happened in Watchers 9. Now, of course, here's the argument that I'm going to say, and what skeptics are going to say. Take any book that has a lot of words in it, such as Moby Dick, and they could apply similar, I guess, ways to look at it. I mean, because they're not sequential. It's not like it's every other word. It's obviously it's looked at in very different ways. So you could find essentially what you're looking for is what the arguments made by the skeptic.
Well, sure. And there was, the famous line that everybody uses that don't believe that this is real is that codes can be found in any text. And that's a true statement. But the problem with it is they aren't found in the same way that they end up in the Torah. I mean, in the Torah, they end up in just there's a whole cluster of words all back to back and touching each other. To get those same words to appear in Moby Dick, you might end up with a table that has literally thousands and thousands of characters in it. So you could find the words, but it's like, well, okay, what does that mean? I mean, there's 7,700 words in this table, and we found them, but they don't have short ELSs, they don't have short skips, and they're not touching each other, and they're scattered through the whole page. So it's like, what does that mean? It just means it's a random event that a computer that was powerful enough was able to discover. And we show that in the Torah code film. I mean, it's the only film about the Torah codes I've ever seen that's actually proved that. But no, there's definitely something going on in the Torah codes. I'm totally convinced of it at this point.
This has been a very political hour, to say the least. We talked about ISIS. We started with global warming. You mentioned the Torah codes, Obama. And when we come back, we got to go more into
appreciated our caller's experience. I thought that was great.
Yeah. A quarter of his life he spent in the military as a contractor and, U.S. Army and U.S. Marines. But everybody stay tuned. And when we return, I encourage you to call in and join the conversations. Preferably stay away from politics. If you want to talk about Planet X and aliens and global warming, anything you want, it's all within Watchers 9. So I will leave it to you. Just stay tuned. We'll be right back.
This is Foster Gamble, and you are listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
Of the UK Ministry of Defense, another guest who appears here very often. All you have to do is go to drjradiolive.com to see the current guests. I encourage you, look through just this past year's worth of guests, and you'll see most of those interviews on the YouTube channel. Again, if you've joined us late, you are listening to Dr. J Radio Live right here on the Dark Matter Digital Network. We are speaking to Richard Shaw, better known as Rick Shaw, who has produced the Watchers series. All 9 of them have an alien element. The first 8 really talked, showed a lot of UFO footage and a lot of alien implants analysis. I remember the Watcher 7, I believe, or was it 8, that had Dr. Roger Lear's last and actually 17th implant removal.
It's Watchers 8.
8, yeah. Implant removal as well as analysis. And there's just so much more. There was actually footage that you yourself caught in Malibu of what I thought was a silver disc, but you actually explained to be, of course, two different lights. But I want to give this time, give this opportunity for you to talk about the Watcher series, where people can find it, and if you have any other upcoming lectures like you did with L.A. Marzulli, where I had a chance to interview at Ciro, both of you. Anything you want, this is your time. Go for it.
Oh, well, that's really kind of you. I mean, anybody can get information by going to my website, which is pinlight.com. Pin, like you stick a pin into something, and light, light.com. And on that site are links to some of the latest Watchers 9 clips, including the UFO clip that we're about to talk about, and also a link to the Torah code film that I finished recently. We have a website that's really the official site for the Torah codes. It's called endtodarkness.com. And we have it actually streaming now. So if you don't want to spend $20 to buy the film, you can, I think, spend $7 or $8 and rent. We have to charge for these things because they're really expensive to produce. And that's how we're paying for it. We don't have some big network behind us. We don't have sponsors who want to steer the content some way that we don't want to go. So that's how we're managing to do it.
And with that being said, I want everyone out there listening to have an opportunity to ask anything you want. Of course, we've been watching the Twitter feed. Just use hashtag DMTalk. You can use Skype, Dr. J Radio Live, DRJ Radio Live, or the other account, Skydiving Lawyer. Again, skydiving, SKYDIVING Lawyer, LAWYER, or call in 818-923-1713. Again, 818-923-1713. And with that being said, we have our first caller. And I know this happens to be, if I'm not mistaken, Dan the Man, area code 951. Welcome to the show.
Dr. J, what's up, man?
How you doing,
Hey,
brother?
this is SoCal Dan, not to be confused, with our abductee. Anyway, now my question is kind of technical, and then I have some breaking news regarding the same. You see, I found these Nazca-style lines in South Texas, and it was verified just recently by Gerald Clark, the Anunnaki specialist, who has a new book called Mercury Rising, by the way. And he emailed me and said this is probably Atlantean, and that it is very likely, a find of great significance. And as of the breaking news, this area is now open to the public. I got an email from the FAA removing the restricted airspace over it. So anyway, my question is more on the camera work.
Well, first of all, I got to say, I appreciate the breaking news. This is why everybody out there listening, you have to be your own researcher and you have to contribute. If it wasn't for what you just said, I would have never known that. So thank you, by the way.
No problem.
I've got a question for the caller here. Have you heard about what the terrain is like, or what the ground?
It is flat. It is Texas, and there are geoglyphs that are artificial geoglyphs out there that are going to require some kind of a Mars face type camera work to 3D them.
Right. I guess what I'm asking is, since I've been to Nazca and I've actually, played in the dirt there.
This is more like Rembrandt. Okay,
really?
It's by the same people, only updated version and in much better condition. It's the Marfa, Texas area.
Yeah,
that's
the only reason I say that's
occur too, right?
Let me just say this really quickly, and we won't get into Nazca here heavily. But what I thought was interesting about Nazca is that the ground there is mostly volcanic, but underneath it was an ancient seabed.
Quartz.
So you've got like kind of this white sandy substrate material, and then you've got this red crushed rock on top of it. And if you just drag a stick through the ground, you end up with a white line. And this is, I mean, all the Nazca lines are. And what's so crazy is that those lines have been there for 1,000 years and haven't been eradicated. I mean, to me, that's just like,
Now this is a little different. The soil in Texas is more like concrete.
Yeah, so they had to chisel
any marks that were made are permanent, and what they've done is a mosaic in the soil using different soils, colors of soils, lines in the soil. It's amazing.
Well, thank you for that. That's really cool.
Dan, you also had a question.
And it's open to the public now. It is American history is now open to American public.
Finally.
These are North American megaliths. You don't have to go to Peru anymore.
Finally is the word I would say to that. You know,
Yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of history here that we don't know. One really cool thing about California, specifically Los Angeles, Preston Denton, a good friend of mine, a researcher, I know you guys all know him. He was on recently, author of 17 books, MUFON investigator of 30 years, going on 31 years, talked about or wrote about in, I think it was 1936, it was in the late 30s, they were looking for gold in Los Angeles, and they uncovered a mine, a gold mine, but it ended up being a cavern that it was linked up to a whole bunch of, it was a maze of caverns with lizard people. It scared them so much, they just sealed it off forever, and I would really like to know where that is so someone can reopen it and let's talk to these lizard people. But anyway,
and all the Egyptian artifacts that are pulled out of Death Valley.
Yeah,
now there are Egyptian ramifications in these geoglyphs also. There's a great big 2.3 mile long female appearing profile of a pharaoh.
You make a really good point too, because when they actually first, according to Anthony Sanchez and the colonel he interviewed, when they found the Dulce base, a place they were looking for the Manhattan Project in 1940s when they started the search, they found these caverns. I don't want to say it wrong. Archipelago Mesa, I could be wrong. That area. And what happened is that the deeper they went in, they found all these artifacts from, all around the world, from Egypt, from Rome. And I just thought it was really amazing. And they were all intact, in pristine condition, because they weren't exposed to the elements. So there's a lot more just right here on the American soil that we are not being told, that we are, of course, being, not shown. And everybody is sort of, pushed to be in a robotic position and say, have a 9-to-5 job, worry about losing your house because you have this mounting debt with these rising taxes. I mean, if only we could be a country like Switzerland, stay out of everybody's problems and, a very low tax, if any. I don't even know if they have a tax, but I know their economy is thriving very well. But anyway, Dan, I know you had something you wanted to say to Rick.
I just wanted to ask, what kind of cameras am I going to need for this thing?
For what specifically?
As well, the geoglyphs are more in the line of you could say Mars faces. Okay, only a lot clearer.
Well, so you want to take aerial photography? Is
aerial
that what you're
photography. Saying? It has to be done in the like a 1,000 to 5,000 foot range, which is why I filed so many federal FOIAs to get this place.
I've done that
removed.
over. I've actually shot over the Nazca lines, and you have to rent a plane and a pilot that knows where all of them are, and so he allowed me to attach.
I have them marked on my YouTube channel. Dr. J can direct you right there. It's under my name, Dan Hoquist.
He allowed me to
several
attach,
videos.
He allowed me to attach 2 cameras to the wings of that airplane, and so that's what we did. They were both GoPro Hero cameras, and I got really excellent footage from it. But basically, you need something that you can remotely start from within the plane, start and stop.
Yeah.
It sounds to me like you're going to need to be at an altitude that would be beyond what a normal drone would be able to do.
Yeah.
So you can do it in. I mean, just how big is your
pocketbook?
pocketbook?
Helicopter to me.
Well, helicopters are good, but and I've done a lot of shooting out of helicopters too, but it's a different kind of thing. It just depends how stable you need your shots to be.
Okay, well, in the meantime, this is it's public. Okay.
Well,
And
go
this
ahead
is
and plug
my
out
main-
your
my-
YouTube channel again.
Yeah, it's Dan Hoquist. It's my name, Hoquist, and it's not Holquist. You'll be directed there first, which was a channel set up directly after I started the Marfa finds. I think it had to have been a government a troll site.
Marfa is
Yeah.
also where they have the lights, the famous Marfa lights, right? Where
Yes.
the closer they get, the further those lights go away. And I've seen
Now Gerald Clark has called these electrical megaliths, which is what I think they are too, which would explain why Nazca is there too. These are light shows. They're art meant to be seen from
the
altitude.
sky. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that makes sense with Nazca. I mean, without a question, you don't have to be a believer of any kind to know that whatever was being made in the Nazca lines, everybody out there, it was for people to watch from high above because
And then
they weren't
a lot
even
of it looks like
discovered.
star maps.
Yeah, that's right. And some people even claim that one of them was a runway. But it really, if you look at all the craft that we've encountered, or even as J. Allen Hynek, after he left Project Blue Book and became a believer, said that these craft are probably not space machines or like rockets, because if they were traveling from far distances, wouldn't they stick around for a while? Rather, they slip in and out of dimensions and hence possibly time. And so
unless they're Planet X or Nibiru, you know, and we're actually in the middle of a crossing.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because that is one of the things we're going to go with this hour. And I encourage, like I said, everybody out there to talk about this. But I wanted to.
Hey, I'm going to hang up, Dr. J, man. Thank you for bringing this guy on. He's really, really knowledgeable.
Yeah, thank you for calling in, and by all means, do check out the Watcher series. If you want to see the one that has all of this is 9. 7 was really cool on aliens, and 8 had the implant surgery. I like 7 because of that cannonball device that just fell from the sky, and of course it was analyzed and had weird metals and weird anomalies. There's just so much to the series. That famous Dome of the Rock UFO, what was it, Watchers 2, Rick, you did it?
Yeah, it was we did it in 2011.
5 different angles.
When it first happened.
Yeah. That was a really amazing. But again, thanks, Dan, for everything.
Thanks for your input, Rick.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Rick, let me ask you this now. Okay, one thing that we yet to talk about, and I do want to go back to some of the climate change and, of course, more Planet X, but the analysis that you did of the famous turkey footage, the Sea of Marmara, is that the way you pronounce it?
Sea of Marmara.
Marmara. And what it was, again, as we mentioned, Dr. Lear was on board of a boat with the cameraman, and this was
actually he was just on the beach.
It was on the beach. I didn't know that. Okay, yeah. I thought it was a boat.
They had like a deck out there, and starting in 2007, they started seeing at that time of the year. It appeared for 3 years in a row straight. And recently, a guy that had been there and knew Yalcin, the cameraman, wrote me with some additional information, which I thought was really fascinating. And he actually sent me a still picture of a new craft that they'd seen in the same location. I mean, this is a real hotbed of UFO activity. And the particular year that I did the analysis on, after looking at the other 2 years, I thought the 2009 footage was the most interesting, because you actually can see actual creatures. Yeah, you can actually see them. I mean, it's like, I'm not making this up. This is real. This is really happening. There were actual alien beings there, clearly visible. I mean, it's fuzzy and blurry, but they're there. I mean, this isn't like photoshopped or, it isn't 3D animation. This is actually something that was captured by this man's camera, and Roger Lear was there, along with 20 other eyewitnesses that actually saw the whole thing. And there was a dog on the beach just sitting there barking at it the whole time. I mean, this was just like, it was probably the most amazing UFO footage I've ever seen. as you know, as you have too, Dr. J, we've seen a lot of footage, both of us. I mean,
Yes.
hundreds and hundreds of these files. In fact, the ones that I just got recently from Jaime,
Yeah, yeah.
I've
Over
scanned through all of them. There were like
500 of them.
500 of them.
That's
Yeah.
right. Everybody out there will get a chance to see them in the YouTube videos that I use for eye candy for interviews such as this. When I archive the shows, I don't like to put just a screenshot of something and let you guys listen. I want you guys to have something to also watch in case you're doing something and then decide to look at your computer screen. So keep a watch in the future for interviews such as this one. When it gets archived to YouTube, you will see some of these amazing files that we have to credit Masan Productions and Televisa Incorporated from Mexico City. As everyone knows, Jaime Masan is a world-renowned journalist. I believe he had 50 million watchers, 50 million people were watching his show 60 Minutes, or the Mexican version of 60 Minutes.
He's done it for what, 20, 25 years?
Yeah, and 24 hours. But one thing that I never knew until your analysis about this turkey, I always call it the turkey UFO.
Sure.
So you see this object, and then you zoom into it, and then you see a window with these two giant pale heads with pale skin and giant black eyes.
Yeah.
You uncovered a third one, and what even looks to be a fourth human-looking ET, or maybe a human, Homo sapien. I have no idea what it is, but it's
all this started when I talked to Dr. Lear before he passed away, and he said that we could see these round heads that look very much like alien grays sticking out of the front of this craft, which is really bizarre. I have to say, it's a viewing portal or something that they opened up and can look out, and they're doing something. We can't really see what it is, but I should probably go into the actual camera that was used. It was Yeltsin, the Turkish man that shot this, was using a Canon, which here in America you would refer to it as probably a GL1, which is just, there was an XL1 and this is a GL1. So it's basically an NTSC camera that in those days recorded on mini DV tape. So, it's basically 720 by 486 pixels, to get really technical. And I do that on purpose so people will know that we're looking at this from as clearly a scientific investigation as we possibly can. So this tape was sent down to Mario Valdez Santiago in Chile, who did a frame-by-frame analysis of it, stripping the fields. So it's mostly, usually when you're recording in NTSC, you're recording in 60 fields a second, 30 frames a second, stripped off some of these fields, and could see that there was a third alien to the right of these two clearly visible large alien heads to the left. Now, when he drew it out, he kind of superimposed upon a freeze frame of this to help people actually see it more clearly, just pencil sketched it in, and it looked like some kind of insectoid creature with big triangular shaped eyes, kind of like a praying mantis kind of creature. Now, as weird as that sound, I've heard of people that have seen these. I've talked to people who I clearly do not think that are crazy. They've had this experience. They've seen these things. Some abductees remember having seen them. Well, that's what was on this ship. Now, in comparisons that I've made with an actual praying mantis, their heads aren't quite as triangular as that. They're a little more rounded. But in studying what a praying mantis does, if you ever seen one or pictures of one, which are all over the internet, you can just pull up a Google search of a praying mantis. They have these triangular shaped heads, and their eyes are kind of like take up most of the space of their head, actually. And they don't have eyeballs in the same sense that we do. They're more like they have something inside that looks like a pupil that moves around, but I don't know how much it moves. So basically, we're talking about eyes that appear to be sort of scattered to a cranial feature of their skeleton. And so because of that, they have to rotate their heads to see in other directions. Now, we have Owls do the same thing. Owls cannot rotate their eyeballs. They have to turn their head. So if you've ever seen pictures of owls, they turn their heads really greatly in either direction. I don't know how many degrees it is, but it might be like a 180 almost. So in this case, I was noticing that these beings were moving their heads around really fast. And I think that's why they can't see unless they're moving their heads to look in other directions. But I think what we need to talk about is using that footage that Yeltsin shot. He had a 200 millimeter extender that he screwed onto the GL1 camera lens, and it gave him, I don't know what the actual power would have been, but maybe 400 times the actual
I know, if only
size.
it was something like an HD with 1080p, some sort
Oh,
of.
it'd have been awesome.
Yeah, you would have really been able to do your analysis. But you were able to find what you call the time dilation, which
Yes,
makes
this
so
is
much
just
sense.
getting into. Sorry, I don't mean to be rambling here. I'll
No,
get to
no.
what I realized looking at this is that it almost just looked like static. I mean, you couldn't really see. You could see like these two large heads kind of bouncing around on the left side, and all of these little sparks flying out from around the ship, which normally are like JPEG artifacts, compression artifacts that those cameras exhibited. And also, once you get it compressed and you're looking at it on a computer, it even gets worse. So I thought, well, what if I slowed the footage way, way down and really did an analysis of it? When I did that and then zoomed in further, scaled it up in Adobe After Effects, really see that these creatures were moving around really at normal speed. And to us, it looked like they were moving 10, 12 times the actual speed in which they were actually moving, and I explained this to Roger one night, what I discovered, and I said, I think this is why we're looking at, from our perspective of time domain, we're looking at a ship that's levitating, which means it's warping gravity, warping time, if it's able to maintain itself hovering like that endlessly for hours, which it was doing. I mean, I think it was out there from something like 2 a.m. till after 5 in the morning. The sun was starting to come up and this thing was still sitting there. I mean, so it was out there for 3.5, 4 hours. I don't know how long totally it was there. But what we've discovered is that people that get near a spacecraft or people that have been abducted always have missing time. And I think it's because these ships warp time because of their levitation technology that they have. And I know, like Bob Lazar talks about that and says that, as the more they increase the field around the ship, the more difficult it is to actually even see the ship. It becomes almost invisible in our time domain, which makes sense. You see these ships fly by and then suddenly just disappear. You don't know what happens to them. Well, all this is starting to become more clear, and Roger got really excited when I told him that, Yeltsin's point of view and this ship's point of view, we were looking into their time domain without being close enough to be affected by it.
And that would make perfect sense, because a lot of people talk about having experiences that last for hours, yet, there's only a certain time being on here. For instance, okay, yes, there's missing time where there was a great video that I've seen where you couldn't see aliens in a window, just like you did with this turkey footage. And this was in Colorado. And this craft, it was going near Colorado Springs, but I don't know how far, because clearly it was near, I want to say, a forest, because there were a lot of trees nearby. And so this craft with lots of lights, definitely saucer shaped, I guess you could say. It was rounded with this dome on top and had almost rainbow lights flickering all around. And so it went behind the trees and it got closer. And this guy's car stalls. And then all of a sudden, he opens the door trying to film this craft as it's getting closer, and you see more detail on it. Then it just cuts off. It gets, to, I don't want to say blurry vision, but, static. And then next thing you know, his car was on, by the way. Next thing you know, according to him, he didn't record the following part. He is in his car. The car is parked on the side of the road. the door is closed, the engine is off, and several hours had passed. I thought if only there was a little more footage, and if there had been a witness, or if there can be a witness, because so many abductees talk about being taken, yet the entire neighborhood's being shut off as if they're
Yes.
you know,
Yeah, that's true. And there's also abductions, like what happened to Captain Robert Salas, where his wife was in bed and she was kind of made unconscious as he kind of floated out the window. I mean, that's even another aspect of it. That's like a telepathic control over our minds of what's really going on here. And that's even referred to in biblical texts and everything else. I mean, these beings have been around for thousands of years, starting to realize that this is real stuff, that this isn't just make believe, this isn't just the movies. This is actually, this stuff is real and exists. And we're just trying to understand it a little bit. Not that we're going to ever be able to completely, but at least we'll know that we can approach it from a feeling of not being totally in the dark of what's going on.
I'm getting feedback. People want to hear more about Planet X, and you
Sure.
did a large segment in Watchers 9 about it. And you mentioned Bob Fletcher. We interviewed him right here back in, I believe it was April. It was a great interview, but of course, everyone has their own view on it, on what this is.
Sure.
Zechariah Sitchin talked about, the 12th planet. And even Jason Martell said that there was a human race, not an extraterrestrial race, on top of the extraterrestrials that were visiting us. That was far more advanced than we are now. That was just simply wiped off this earth. So clearly there's cycles. And that's what you were able to find, to have found to be documented in all these texts. So I was wondering if you talk a little bit more about that, because
Sure. I just wanted to mention that on the Pinlight site that I mentioned before is the whole Kumburgash UFO clip, if someone wants to look at
you mean, for everyone out there, that's what I just refer to as the Turkish UFO. Yeah.
The whole clip is there. They can see it for free. It's just a piece of Watchers that I thought I'd throw out there so people could see this, because I think it's important. And it also has that clip of Fausto, who a mutual friend of ours, Dr. J, that called down an entity in a park.
Yeah,
in
he
Southern
does
California.
basically what Dr. Greer does and all these other people, where he meditates for a certain amount of time and things just show up. There's a lot of people that claim to have this ability around this world. Antonio Urzi in Italy. I don't remember the guy's name in South America, but we mentioned him.
Right, Antonio's like a really great,
very famous case. Yeah.
He takes some really incredible photography too.
Yes, he does. And his photography is more, what's the word I'm trying to find? I guess you could say traditional, because there are a lot more of the crafts that look like what you would see, in say a 1950s movie or just a regular flying saucer.
I think there's something happening in various regions of the world, Dr. J. I mean, if you look at what's going on in Brazil, and I noticed going through all of this footage Jaime gave me, that what's happening in Brazil does not look like what's happening in Italy. What's happening in Italy does not look so much like what's happening in California when you see UFO videos from here.
Do you think there's different alien factions that are working with different countries? For instance, the U.S. may be aligned with some race, and Russia may be aligned with another, and China another, and Brazil with yet even another. I mean, because the last guest this past week,
it's all conjecture, but it would seem like they're tailoring their visuals for the country that they're visiting. I mean, we've seen, I guess, the country that's been the most diverse as far as a multitude of UFO sightings has been Mexico. Mm-hmm. But then you still see stuff in Peru, and you see stuff in Brazil, and you see stuff overseas. I mean, there's been UFOs hovering over Israel, that we talked about earlier. So, I mean, they're everywhere. I mean,
Greece. I remember Greece said there's not too long ago, and then
now Turkey
in 1990. Turkey, of course, Italy, as we mentioned, Urzi. UK always produces great stuff.
But I've never seen a ship like what we've seen now in Turkey flying over Brazil. And I've never seen these orb-like structures. I mean, these are gigantic manifestations appearing over Brazil. They're shocking. I mean, I look at it and I go, why isn't anybody talking about this stuff? I mean, there's probably like a dozen lights in formation just hovering over the city. Sometimes, I mean, there's the one that we put in Watchers 8 that we kind of nicknamed the Scepter because it looks like a big jewel and it has a shaft that comes down under it like you'd be holding that, I W this. I mean, that's what it looks like. And then the shaft comes loose and four of these orb-like craft or whatever they are float down almost to the horizon level and then just disappear. I mean, what are these things? I mean, they're incredibly fascinating. This is why I get kind of torqued off about the whole SETI thing, like you guys were talking about earlier this evening, of radio waves and all that. I mean, we're already ourselves past using radio waves in a traditional sense. Everything's digital now. We're sending digital signals out for television, for heaven's sakes.
And as you mentioned, Jaime Maussan did provide us with a lot. I mean, a huge archive of footage, and everybody who was fortunate enough to be at the Zero event, which is hosted by Yvonne Smith, where I had the opportunity to interview on stage Jaime Maussan for 3 hours. He showed a multitude of videos, great videos, and he gave both of us access to all of them. As unfortunately, the drive that I brought was too small, and so I had to bring it to you. And you spent 2 days unzipping files, and so again, everyone out there will see it. But since we have less than, I'd say about 20 minutes into
Planet
the show.
X.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about that because you've spoken to Bob Fletcher, as we have. You said Marshall Masters was the other one?
Yeah, Marshall's a good friend of mine.
And who was the one that you used in Watchers 9?
Gil Broussard.
Yes, and everyone has their own perspective. A lot of people don't think it's there. Some people even connect it to no gold in Fort Knox, like Bob Fletcher did. What is your conclusion? And through all the research that you did, and this recent person that you interviewed, what cycles is this planet interfering with us? Because in the movie Watchers 9, there was a mainstream movie that I had never heard about that I actually ended up seeing after, Melancholia, which starred Kiefer Sutherland.
Trier.
Yeah, that was made by him and Kirsten Dunst. And I don't want to spoil it for everyone, but it was about a large planetary body that was supposed to be making a pass near Earth, but it ends up colliding with Earth. And so, of course, why would he make such a film? It was bizarre in some ways.
I don't know. I rented the Blu-ray of that on Netflix and watched it. And this is one bizarre movie. But then I went into when it's a movie that I'm particularly intrigued with, I'll always go and I'll watch the behind the scenes documentary, how the film was made and all that. They spent literally weeks making that planet in 3D so it would look real, and the interior of the planet, so that when it exploded, piece would fly out and it wasn't just a hollow ball, and they went into great detail with that whole thing. And it's like, even though it didn't look like Planet X to me, it was kind of a blue planet, but this was the first serious film about this topic in 50 years. I mean, the last time that we've seen anything was When Worlds Collide. It was a George Powell science fiction movie back in 1951. And a few months before that, it was another movie we show a little bit of the trailer from, called The Man from Planet X, which is, was a kind of a low-tech effects piece, and it was a little goofy in places, but still they were talking about it. But then you have to go back before that, the year preceding. There was a guy by the name of Immanuel Velikovsky who wrote a book called Worlds in Collision. And my good friend Lee Canelon gave me that book, must have been 15, 20 years ago. And I read it and I found it to be chilling because it was all based on his actual research from around the world. And what he was trying to do is understand all of the stuff that was written in biblical text. And if that stuff really happened, he had to prove that this was real. So he compared ancient texts from all over the world at the dates when these events in Scripture happened. So essentially, he was doing what Gil Broussard spent several years of his life also trying to do. But his research in those days, Velikovsky's research, was panned by most of the scientific community. But the guy that really felt that he was really onto the right track and really valued his research was Albert Einstein. And what was really interesting, last time I was interviewing Professor Eliyahu Rips, who is pretty much known as the inventor of the Torah codes in the modern era, brought up the topic of Velikovsky without me having to do that, and said to me across his dining room table, the universe is a far more supernatural environment than anyone realizes it is.
One thing, a cool fact about Einstein, if you believe in the Eisenhower meeting in '54, which there's a lot of documents
with alien beings.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Some of the people in attendance included, of course, the bishop from Los Angeles, not the prime minister from the UK, but his attaché. I don't know if it was Clement Attlee or that was the prime minister. I'm not sure. But of course, Howard Hughes. That makes sense of. I don't know what it makes sense of, but Howard Hughes being the billionaire at the time that could fund anything, to be there, very involved in aerospace. We have DirecTV because of him, but Albert Einstein happened to be present there. And that would make perfect sense of why he was always thinking outside the box and had such a deep interest, which many people don't know about. But he was really interested in UFOs and aliens, and of course the other side and anything supernatural.
Oh, I'm sure. I really think there was a lot of things going on in the late 30s and 40s. I mean, we had the whole World War II thing and incredible technology being designed. But you have to also remember, this was the age of Albert Einstein, of Nikola Tesla, of Oppenheimer. All of these brilliant scientific minds were all working on problems because they had to figure out how to defeat the Third Reich, essentially. But I think there was also other things going on that we aren't made privy to. And, the whole idea of Project Paperclip, where all of these German scientists, our own space program. I mean, all of these things merged into some kind of a weird thing. But you can bet that there was something going on, and that a core of this nucleus of this group knew it was happening. In fact, Roger used to talk about, and sometimes Dr. Lear and I would have these discussions about, I mean, he knew all about the Philadelphia experiment, and he knew the people involved in it. And I mean, it's like some of the stuff he was telling me, I wasn't sure if he was joking or if it was real.
I just got a really cool tweet from a minute ago. This is Mart, goes by Exit Stage Left 66. It says, there was also a kids' TV show from the 1950s that featured Planet X. Did you know about that?
No, that one I hadn't heard of. That's interesting. I'd like to find out more about that.
So tell me, what are your conclusions?
Well, after reading that book, I got to thinking, when he said that during the parting of the Red Sea, which he was this was back to Velikovsky, he was saying that the North American Indians reported that they were getting hit by 100-pound hailstones and that the oceans stood up.
And are you talking about the magnetic tilt? Because wasn't Planet X, first of all, two things. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm just getting this from those sources, your documentary and you, that Earth tilted its axis, I believe, 23
degrees.
23.
Yeah, right.
And on top of that, wasn't there a time where the Earth stopped rotating because of that?
That's why we think the waters perform so strangely. And I had a conversation about this once with Rabbi Matityahu Glazerson, who's a Torah code expert, but he's also an expert in ancient Hebrew. And I said, so when the Red Sea parted, and he goes, it never says that. And I said, what? says the
here's
waters parted.
another
I said,
question.
no, wait a minute. Wait, but this is important.
Yeah, yeah.
It says the waters parted. I said, okay.
Like
He
the
said,
Red Sea.
in ancient Hebrew, when you're referring to something plural like that, it meant all waters worldwide, not just the Red Sea. All the waters parted. And that's
And
a
to
huge
them,
clue.
obviously, the whole world was just that region because they had never crossed the Atlantic. At least,
They wouldn't have known about it.
Yeah.
There wasn't the internet to tell them, oh, the same thing happened up, here or there. The Indians got slammed by something.
You might actually see this question right here yourself. I'll just go ahead and read it anyway. This is also from James. Planet X closing in, could that be a cause of the increase in UFO sightings and the diversity of them and aliens? A quickening, perhaps?
Well, it's been postulated, and of course we have no make rash statements about it, but it has been postulated that there's a lot of extra activity going on because everyone's pulling up their lawn chairs to see what's going to happen next to the Earth. I mean, and that's kind of like, I've heard this before. It may be. We also know that in the Middle Ages, before the bubonic plague, there was a lot of UFO activity because it's reported in ancient texts during the Middle Ages that they saw signs in the sky. They saw a burning beam, a fiery beam falling to the earth. I mean, from the sky. I mean, now we'd look at it and go, it's a cigar-shaped UFO because they all tend to glow and change colors. We got footage of that stuff now, Dr. J, as you know. So this was a new thing. They'd never seen this stuff before. And then right after all that happened, the bubonic plague came and wiped out 30 million people. So it's weird, but it's not unprecedented that there's some kind of a cosmic event going on where these beings kind of make themselves known.
The bubonic plague, a lot of people, even Ancient Aliens, did an episode on this, and so did John Greenwald, who has the Black Vault, where he has all the FOIA, Freedom of Information Act requests that he's gotten from the CIA, FBI, NSA, and all the alphabet soup agencies regarding UFOs. And what was said, and I know you can confirm this, is at the edge of these towns or villages that were the Black Plague was breaking out were these beings that were cloaked in black, like the Grim Reaper, with sickles, like farmer sickles, like the Grim Reaper, and they would,
Right.
they
call
wave
them scythes.
Yeah, scythes, and wave them around, and this mist would come.
They were emitting a hissing sound.
Yeah. And then that's it. Almost contained, the bubonic plague within the confounds of that.
Yeah, I mean, like you and I had a discussion, I think it was yesterday, that in the book of Ezekiel in the Old Testament, it talks about these beings coming down with powerful weapons in their hands. Another being comes down wearing white linen and marks people on the forehead that wept and sighed over the injustices that were going on in Israel. And everybody else was killed with these powerful weapons. Now, these beings came down and just wiped people out. It was like no problem. They didn't say they were holding swords. They didn't have daggers in their hands. They just called them powerful weapons. I mean, if that's not sci-fi, I don't know what is. So now we see in the 1500s in Brandenburg, a dozen black with these strange weapons in their hands, and everybody dies. It's beyond just mere coincidence in my opinion.
Now this is we only got under 10 minutes left, so I'll try to cram in as much. And of course, people love to hear about aliens. That's what this show almost most guests speak about. Of course, we do some politics if we get high level politicians that want to talk about it, or free energy or other conspiracies. It's totally fine, but primarily aliens. But this is very controversial too, so I want to spend as little time as possible so I can get as much out of you before it ends. But AIDS, some people, since it just popped out of nowhere, and the mainstream theories, it came from monkeys, but some people claim that it was created by the Office of OSNI, Office of Special Naval Investigations, and brought to Africa by the CIA as a means of population control.
Or I've heard also like could have been the WHO, but none of this. It's all conjecture. There's no way we can prove where it came from or anything like that. But I will tell you that I worked on a film back in 2002 in South Africa called "Beat the Drum." And it was about AIDS, and we were trying to get people educated on why they were getting sick. A lot of people didn't understand what was happening to them, especially people that lived in faraway places or isolated areas. And so we got a lot of information from the Clinton administration at the time. Their AIDS czar sent us paperwork on what was really going on in South Africa. And it was stunning information because it wasn't about any kind of conspiracy. It was like how the disease was by a culture, a race of people that were a lot of them superstitious and thought a lot of this was due to their ancestors cursing them and all of these kind of things. When actually it was 99% of the time it was heterosexual, unprotected sex with infected people.
And you mentioned also, of course, that woman being pierced with the needles.
Oh yeah, they did do ear piercings, and that one girl would have AIDS, and then after they finished piercing their ears with the same awl, they all ended up with AIDS. Or there were truck drivers who traveled from one country to another, and they would visit prostitutes along the way. Then they'd come home and give it to their wives. So it was spreading like logarithmically. And so there were like 28 million people. The last number I heard have died in sub-Saharan Africa from AIDS.
Now, we do got about 5 minutes left, so I want to get, like I said, as much as information is out from you as possible. Obviously, we can spend a few episodes just on Watchers 9 and do a couple months on the entire series. I really encourage people out there to watch them, especially if you want to see some really amazing alien or UFO footage or mummies from South America, specifically Peru, that were not that had giant heads that were not from binding. But do you know anything about Solar Warden? Did any of your research come across any of that?
So what was that?
Solar Warden. Apparently, it's supposed to be, if I'm not mistaken, Johnny, you can correct me on this, a military space program of some sort. Johnny, you know about this?
You got me on that one, Dr. J.
Well,
I was going to cut to the chase on Planet X because I didn't really finish. Basically say what Gil believed to be that if it was going to happen this year, we would start seeing it this fall. And typically, according to biblical texts, all of these events happen around the time of Passover. So that would be March and April of next year. And if it doesn't happen by then it probably won't happen for another year. And after that, the chances go way down that we're going to see it for quite a while, according to his research. Now, we don't know, and we don't have a crystal ball, and we can't say, a lot of the sightings that people see of it can be attributed to all sorts of weird camera anomalies. I've seen stuff that looks really great, and then when you really get into it and you study it, it's like, well, okay, there was a red LED inside the camera housing reflecting off the lens, or there was something on the edge of the picture that's causing an internal lens flare. And I've done experiments with cameras to see what happens when you do various things. So unless I see features or something that basically looks like what Planet X, how it's been described historically, then it's most likely not real. And the other thing Gil was saying, and I think his analysis is great, where he says, if there were a big planet that's visible in the sky, then amateur astronomers all over the world would all be seeing it and reporting on it. It wouldn't just be one isolated guy with a cell phone camera shooting out of an airplane window. It'd be like a major global event, and everybody would know about it. In which case, I would go along with Doug Elwell. It would be the sign of the coming of the Son of Man, and all the earth would mourn. It wouldn't be. They couldn't hide it anymore because there it frigging is. What are you going to say at that point?
Let me ask you this, since we're really cutting it close on time.
Sure.
9 series of Watchers with Ali Marzulli. You've traveled around the world, shown some really amazing footage. Give me the top 3 things, if you can, in 2 minutes that really stick out in your head that everybody out there would drop what they're doing and want to go see them.
Oh, what things we covered that I thought were the most
Yeah,
interesting?
yeah.
Well, okay. I think one of them was actually doing the entire analysis of a man that had an implant, an alien implant, and we start to finish with him, where we detect it, we use various pieces of test equipment to show where it is. Then we go into surgery. The implant disappears from the ultrasound machine, so you can't see it. L.A. Marzulli says a little prayer, and after an hour looking for it, where we knew where it was on this guy's leg, it just pops right into frame again. Triciano removed it, and then we took it to the lab and looked at it under electron microscope. I was there and witnessed that. And if I remember right, you were there too, I think.
Yeah, that's right. That's where I met my dear friend Jack Osborne, who has been a guest on the show, which everybody can hear that interview on my YouTube channel, which is Dr. J Radio Live.
Then another one that I thought was really, and I'm rushing to try to hurry here. I don't know how much more time
we're
I
cutting
got.
close. Yeah,
But was the story about the black-eyed children, which sounds really far-fetched. Like, how could that possibly be? And so where I'm setting up that a drama to do a reenactment of it, because after reading the book that we were basically detailing, David Weatherly's book.
I was just going to say David Weatherly was the one who
great
talked
researcher
about him when I had him on the show. Yeah,
and I'm thinking, this is really wild. If this really is scary, and I told my co-producer Torah Terry about what I was doing and trying to do, and I needed a child actor to play a black-eyed child, and she started screaming, and I said, what? And she said, my friend just had this experience and told me about it a few days ago. I said, oh, come on, Terry, you got to be joking. She said, no. So I said, well, where is she from? She said, she's from Milwaukee, but she's going to be in LA next week. I mean, it was like all lined up and set in motion before I even mentioned it to her. So we interviewed this lady, and she told us her story, and we showed her the cover of David's book, and she just almost, she shirked away from it, and it made her feel all creepy again, like her original experience. When that happened, I realized, my gosh, this is a real experience. This is the real deal. And then another thing that I thought was really fascinating was when we unwrapped elongated baby mummy in Peru.
I thought that was really good, and I was just going to say to save your best for last, because right now I'm going to give you the opportunity to give everyone your final statement, to say what talk a little bit more about the mummy if you can in a minute or so, and of course plug in the website where people can get the Watcher series.
Sure, thank you. Well, you can get Watcher series a number of places. I mean, I can give you all the different websites. Each one of them have interesting materials. lamarzulli.net. You can buy anything from his website. He's my partner in crime here with the Watchers. I've known LA since 2007, and we've been really good friends, and we do the shows together. We co-produce them. And there's also watcherstv.com is another official website. There's my website, pinlight.com, pinlight.com. And then there's the Torah Code website, which is endtodarkness.com. So all those will take you to where you need to go to get further information on this.
And people really can just Google the Watcher series and they will come to any of these 4 sites. Again, Rick, it's been a fascinating show. We went everywhere. We definitely have to do another show on climate change. Everybody listening, this show is about you. I wouldn't be here if no one was listening. So you guys tell me who you want to hear, what topics you want to cover. I pay very close attention to it. Just go to the website, drjradiolive.com, drjradiolive.com. That is the only phrase you have to remember with regards to the show, because that is the name of every social media account, from YouTube, Facebook, Flickr, Tumblr, Twitter, Instagram. Some that I don't even know, but I know it's there. Google Plus. There's even a Gmail account associated for it. But I encourage you to use the contact page if you're trying to get news to me or a guest request, or if you're looking for a show that has not been posted. There's been some problems that have caused us to be delayed, but they will be there soon. Just some awesome videos on the YouTube channel. As I mentioned, Jack Osborne. You could see Senator Gravel talking about Snowden and, of course, the disclosure. Linda Corteil, the very rare 29th floor incident abduction in New York, and so many more. David Sarita, Nassim Harriman, William Brown, Giorgio Tsoukalos from Ancient Aliens, all available on youtube.com/DRJ Radio Live. Thanks again, everyone, for listening. Thank Richard Shaw. Thank my co-host, Johnny Webb. Thank callers, and especially you, the listeners. Stay tuned for Art Bell. And this is Dr. J signing off.